Sailing uncharted waters, exploring the new navigation API. This is going to be a fun talk, lots of demos we're going to go through, lots of different things. If you want to see these slides, kind of walk through them as I do. None of the demos are in the slides. There are links to live versions of the demos at the end of the slides. If you want to read ahead, that QR code will take you to the slides. You can get in there, poke around as I'm talking through. I'll leave that up there for another second. I still see a phone or two. All right, we'll continue. All right, so where are we going? We're going to talk through, very high level, what is the navigation API? What does it do? What is it for? We'll talk through some specific problems that it solves, because it was created for a reason, right? So we'll talk through those specific problems that it solves. We will look at some of the more important aspects of the API just by name. And then the latter, probably 2/3 of the talk is going to be going through demos where we'll look at the specific pieces and parts and how they kind of fit together. All right, so a little bit about myself before we get started. I mentioned already, I'm a big Bulldogs fan, from Atlanta mostly, outside the city. Been married for 13 years. We have a son and a daughter. My son turned 4 Monday. My daughter turns 2 in December, so they keep us very busy right now. I've been doing software engineering for about 9 years, and I say I was doing web-adjacent technologies for 18 because my first 9 years was in computer-based training, so doing lots of computer-y type things, but wasn't doing full software engineering yet. I am a full-stack engineer, but I focus primarily on the front end for the past few years, and I'm very passionate about developer experience, about tooling. You can find me everywhere online at Gesualdo, so Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. GitHub, raygesualdo.com. There's some links. I think there's links to that later on in the talk too. I work at a company called SalesLoft, based here out of Atlanta. It's an Atlanta startup. No longer a startup. We've grown now. But we are a sales engagement platform. Let me see if I can get the sales pitch right. We are a revenue workspace that serves full cycle sellers. And we do some really interesting things with AI to help them prioritize the right things at the right time. There I serve as a software architect on our front-end enablement team. So a lot of the talk that Ben was giving this morning about DevOps, that is like my bread and butter. That's what I'm doing most days. I also help work through our design system and do a lot of fun things with front-end architectures. So let's talk about the navigation API. What is it? So I literally just screenshot this from MDN. The navigation API is documented there. I do want to call out this big banner here right in the center that says experimental, and that is because this API is experimental. It's been implemented in all of the Chromium-based browsers, so Chrome, Edge, Brave, Opera, all of those. You can use this right now, and I think it has been for a year or so. It also went through a name change, so if you go to a really old version of Chrome, you use it under a different name. But this has been ratified. The spec has been ratified, but I don't think it's fully solidified yet. Or the API has been solidified, but not fully ratified yet. So Safari and Firefox have said that they do intend to ship this eventually, but right now it's just available in Chromium browsers as an experimental feature. It's not behind any flags. You can just use it right now. So if you're building like a Chrome extension, you could make use of this. Or if you're just in a situation, maybe an internal tool where you just use Chromium-based browsers, Edge or what have you, you can still make use of this. But if you're having to support browsers outside of the Chromium family, you'll have to wait a little bit before we can make use of this entirely. I think someone is working on a polyfill, but I don't think it's complete yet. Again, some of these API pieces and parts have solidified just in the past, it's like 6 months. So the polyfill, I don't think is fully there yet. So let's talk about what it is. All I've talked about is that it's experimental. I'm just going to read the first sentence, even though I hate doing that on slides, but the navigation API provides the ability to initiate, intercept, and manage browser navigation actions, right? So if you've used something like Angular or Vue or Svelte or React, you're typically using a router where you can navigate to different pages. You have your link component, or maybe you're just using bare A tags, and the router will listen to those events, and it'll handle all of the single page navigation, right? So the way that it's doing that, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, none of them do it the exact same way because there's no way in the browser built in to handle those in a consistent fashion. The navigation API is built for that. So, as you are building your spas. It's not, you can kind of use it with like multi-page applications, but again, it was built with single page applications or spas in mind. All right, so it allows us to work with navigation with a spa with a first class API in the browser. What does that mean? We'll get to some of the demos and it'll be a lot more clear what that looks like as we go. So let's talk about the problems that it solves, right? Because we have some things that we can use to do this today, right? We have history.pushState, history.replaceState, window.location, a lot of things that we can kind of mush together to get something working. But the whole point is we don't have a unified API. And so we have a lack of universal navigation event handling. If you've ever worked with maybe a system that has multiple front-end libraries, like if you have an Angular and a React or a Vue and a Svelte application sitting next to each other, you might have had a hard time getting their routers to talk to each other because there's no way to universally capture browser events. You can like sometimes capture things under certain conditions, but then not others. Hitting the back button on the browser like doesn't do what doesn't pop or doesn't bubble up the event like it should. And history.pushState only sends one event and link tags are a different one. It's a mess. And so there is no way to kind of capture all of that in one area. Furthermore, if you have used history.pushState directly, its API is weird. You have to give it like a title and then some state, which if you're using a single page app, you're typically just passing null for both of those. And then the third argument is the URL you want to go to. It's very strange. It wasn't built for single page applications in mind, whereas the navigation API is. And like I mentioned earlier, there are lots of userland navigation implementations. So in prepping for this, I looked through Angular Router, the source code for Angular Router, Vue Router, React Router, and the underlying history library, and the router in SvelteKit. And all of them basically try to recreate what this does natively inside themselves, which means none of them talk to each other. So if you're in a situation with micro front ends, we've got it's not a micro front end situation, but at SalesLoft, we're almost done with this, thankfully, transitioning from Angular to React. And as we were kind of walking down that path, I had to get their routers to talk to each other. And getting those to talk to each other was actually a pain. Thankfully, not thankfully, I had to kind of hack it on the Angular side. We got it working, but it would have been fairly trivial if I had had this API available to me. And so if you have a situation where you have these different languages or these different, even if you're using React, right, you might be using Reach Router and React Router. And those don't talk to each other. So all of these userland implementations aren't built on the same foundation, so none of them work well together. So let's talk about the navigation object. How do we use it? What do we actually do with it? So if you have a Chromium-based browser and you open up the DevTools, you can type in window.navigation right now and you'll see it, right? So you'll see that object in the console. We'll talk about 3 bits off of that. We have navigation.navigate, which does exactly what it says it does. You give it a URL and it'll kick it into the history for you. And you can optionally say to replace the current entry in the history stack. Navigation.addEventListener is where you have that centralized event handling where you can listen to every single navigation event coming through your entire application. We're going to see a demo of that soon. And then lastly, navigation.currentEntry gives you the current entry in the history stack. So if you're ever needing to check like where am I at or needing to get the state from a current entry, you have that available to you. So window.navigation is kind of one of the main entry points. The second entry point I want to talk about, and we'll actually see first in our demos, is the navigation event, capital N, capital E. So when you use navigation.addEventListener and you listen to the navigate event, what you get in the callback is a navigation event. And that event has lots of properties, which we'll see in a moment. It also has this one method called intercept, which is where all the magic happens. And that's gonna be really cool to see once we get there. So we're gonna see a demo of that happening, but that's where you can actually tell the browser, I'm going to be making a navigation as if someone had clicked a link in a multi-page application. Question.
Are there polyfills for other browsers?
So the question was, are there polyfills for other browsers? There is, I think, one that's currently being worked on, but I don't think it's fully fleshed out yet. Great question. All right, so from here on out, we're going to be looking at demos, we're going to be looking at some source code, checking out all these different bits. And I said, we're going to look at navigation event first. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to switch over to, hey, it actually worked. Let's see, what are we at here? 175. People in the back, can you see? I know it's kind of smaller than I was wanting. Can you see that text? Okay. I'll be walking us through it as we go. So there's nothing like visually impressive about this demo. It's going to look pretty much the same across all 5, but we're going to see a lot of the different ways that the navigation API operates. Now, this is our first one, so we've got our little rowboat emoji because we're just getting started out. We're building those muscles. We're getting an understanding of what this is. We'll see some other boats as we get farther in. So this navigation event, again, anytime you trigger a navigation through any means, the navigation event gets fired, and we can listen to it. And so what I've done here on the right-hand side is I'm going to I'm going to print out some of those properties I was talking about, and we'll see what they are and how they differ based on which type of link or which type of navigation you perform, right? So if I click on this link, and this is just a normal A tag, there's nothing special about this, and it's really hard to see, but down in the corner, you get that little tooltip from the browser saying this is the link. So normal A tag, nothing special. If I click this, we won't look at the source code for this demo, but I've added a listener that prints out the data here and then cancels the navigation. So all we're doing is looking at the different ways that this navigation event is being bubbled up. So let's look at a few of the properties. The navigation event does extend from the capital E event, so you can do things like prevent default and stop propagation and things like that, like you can on a normal event. These are all the things specific to the navigation event object or class. So the first thing you see is can intercept is set to true. That's going to almost always be true unless it's a cross-origin navigation, in which case the browser's not going to let you try to intercept it anyway. So that'll almost always be true, but it's just a good thing to check to make sure you're not doing too much work or firing extra promises if you're doing data fetching, things like that. The destination object, I'm actually only showing a portion of what's in there. That's another like capital N navigation, capital D destination class / object. I just pulled off 2 of the most relevant pieces of data. Same document, that's false, right? Because we're navigating from one page to another. And then it gives us the full URL. And the full URL is helpful because we can then parse that out with the URL constructor and get the host and the origin and the protocol, which rarely used, probably most significantly to us. We can grab the path name. We can grab the search string to then parse out into query params, the hash if we're doing anything based on looking at the hash or the anchors. So we've got the URL of where this link was going to go. I'm going to skip the next few because we'll come back to those, and let's look at navigation type. So navigation type, I think there's 4 or 5, but the one you'll see most often is push, meaning just like in a multi-page application, when you click a link and it takes you to the next page, it has stuck that navigation event or that history event in the history stack. So you can go back and then forward in your browser with the back and forward buttons. So navigation type of push means it's done that exact same thing. It's pushed this event onto the stack, or will push this event onto the stack. We've canceled it, so it's not there. Signal, there are ways to cancel navigation. So we'll see this in a little bit, but in the middle of a navigation, maybe I hit the little X where the reload button is. We can use the abort signal class. And if you're not familiar with abort signals, it's a way to asynchronously, or not asynchronously, but to cancel typically asynchronous work, things like event listeners or promises. I'll let you dig more into those. And then user initiated is true. So someone clicked a link or submitted a form, right? The user did an action that triggered a navigation event from an HTML element. All right, so those are the first few we're going to look through. And then if I just keep clicking on these fake pages, like the only thing that changes is the URL. All the other data attributes or all the other properties are going to stay the same because I'm clicking a normal link. Now I'm going to click this link, and this link has a download attribute. Let's see. Let's view page source. Right here, this link, right, has a download attribute, and I've given it the name of the file that I want it to create when it's downloaded. Again, these are normal A tags. I'm not doing anything fancy here. This is nothing over the top. Normal A tags. If I click this, it's still not going to do anything because I'm canceling all them. But we can now see that the download request field is no longer null, and it's populated with the value of whatever the download attribute had, right? So now I can know that this is actually triggering a download. In most cases, you want to ignore these, which we'll see in a little bit, but it's good to know that it is there. And there are times when you may want to listen for those downloads as well. Go to top and go to bottom. These are just anchors, right, to go to fragments at the top and bottom of the page. So if I click it, we can see now same document is now true, right? Because we're not navigating to another page, we're just staying in the same page, going up and down. And hash change is now true, right? So with both of those values, I now know this navigation event, it's just staying on the same page, but moving to a different fragment. And then going to top and bottom, the only thing, again, that changes between those two is the hash at the end of the destination URL. All right, but we also have form submissions, right? So HTML forms, when you click the submit button, based on the method on the form, it'll default to a get, or you can also put a method of post on there to post data. Well, those are navigation events, and we can actually listen to those and do something with them. So if I submit this form, we can see hash changes back to false, same document is back to false, but the query string has been updated to include name equals Ray. So the URL there is showing that we have changed that. Now, for a post form, right? So a post form, when you submit a post, you're sending the contents of the form as a form data, capital F, capital D, a form data object. So when I post this form, the form is pointing to /API/signup, right, in the action attribute. So you see that URL, here's where the form is trying to go to, and we can now see that the form data is populated. Now, in the browser, if you were to do this in the console, that's a capital F, capital D form data object, which doesn't serialize directly. I did a little bit of work to get it to print out prettily, but it's a form data object that you can work with to get out fields and do the .gets or .getAlls to get those values. We can hit reload. And now hitting reload, our navigation type has changed. So I said there was push. There's also reload, which is just saying reload the page. So the destination URL is back to our just current page. Interestingly, same document is false. I don't know why that is, just how they built the spec. Oh, you know what? I need to back up for just 1 second. When you submit the forms, user initiated at the bottom, that's still true. All right, because we're submitting normal HTML forms. We've been working with normal A tags so far. When I hit reload, user initiated is false. And at first blush, this may seem a little strange because it's like, well, I as the user clicked a button. But that button reloaded the page programmatically via JavaScript. If I had turned JavaScript off, the reload button would do nothing. Whereas if I turned JavaScript off, the form posts, the forms would still work, the links would still work. So if it can work without JavaScript, user initiated is going to be true. If it requires JavaScript to programmatically do some sort of navigation or even a reload, that user initiated is going to be false. Okay, so that's a slight gotcha with how that works. And then I'm also, this last button here is using the old style history.pushState. So even if we're still using a library that has history.pushState calls in it, it still gets grabbed by the navigation event. Again, any navigation event is listened to by this listener. And navigation type is a push, user initiated is false, again, because it's a programmatic navigation. And then the URL is changed to history.pushState. All right, so this is the navigation event. We went through a lot of the different properties that are on there. Next demo, we're going to look at how we can look at some of those to decide whether or not to actually act on a navigation event. But before I move on, any questions? Yes, sir.
Can you get to pop? Like you get the back button?
Yes, we'll get to. So the navigation type is never pop. It's going to be reload, push, replace. I think there's one that's rather esoteric, very edge casey. But going back, I don't think going back actually. Oop. This one isn't set up to actually handle the backs, but I think it would still be. It might be pop. I honestly can't remember. That's a great question. We'll look at that one after because I don't think I have a demo that exercises that code path. Any other questions? Yes?
Way to get the method, like when you submitted a form and it was a post, is there a way to know that was a post?
By deduction, because if the query string changes, then it's going to be a get. If you have form data, it's going to be a post because you don't have a form data object from a get, and more than likely a post isn't going to change the query params. So you can deduce it, but there's nothing that says this is exactly the method of the form. All right, we'll keep on rolling through. We got some more one more question.
One more. Does the navigation event include anywhere in it the triggering DOM element?
Yeah, so again, this is this inherits from the event object, which has target, source element, all of those things on it. All right, let's go to the next one, and we'll keep answering questions as we go, but I do want to get through here. This one's actually going to be pretty short, but we do finally get to look at some JavaScript. So all of these work most of the same way. Oh, we're on demo number 2, so we've graduated from a rowboat to a sailboat, so we're getting a little more advanced. We're navigating a little better. All right, so this one I want to look at, when should we intercept navigation events? So if we click on the fake page 1, 2, and 3, they still do nothing. But if I click on download link, it's actually, I don't know, you can see it in the right, it's like downloading something. It's downloading nothing, so it's airing out, but it's actually downloading something. So we're not intercepting this event anymore. If I click the fragments for top and bottom, it actually moves the page, kind of. If I open up JavaScript source, it'll take us to the bottom. There we go. You can go to the top, go to the bottom. Woo, those work. If I click the get, nothing happens. If I click the post, it works. Right? So something is controlling, something is checking these different values and saying, well, should we intercept this and should we block it or eventually handle this as a single page app navigation or shouldn't we? Let's investigate what that code is. So if you look at this code if you go to the MDN docs for Navigation API or read up on the Chrome for Developers blog post that first introduced this, the function I'm about to show you is copy and pasted right from there. So for most single page applications, you will want to do a check to see whether or not you should intercept this navigation. So let me bump it up a little bit because these screens are tiny. So this is the exact same source code that's running this demo. I have another bit of JavaScript that grabs the source code, sticks it in this code block. So you're looking at exactly what's running on this page. So up top, we have our window.navigation.add event listener, and we say, let's listen to that navigation event. The first thing we do is we run this check. Should we intercept it? If we shouldn't, or rather should not intercept. If we shouldn't intercept it, we just return, nothing happens, or rather we don't block anything, so the default behavior happens. If we want to intercept it, for this demo, we're just canceling the navigation. So that second line of event.prevent default, that's what's keeping the fake links from working and the get form from working. So let's look at should not intercept. So the first thing we look at is, I said we have this can intercept value that'll typically be true, but every once in a while is false. So we look at that first. Will the browser allow us to intercept this? If you try to intercept an event that can't be, the browser will actually throw an error. So the first thing we check is, can we intercept this? Then we look at, is this a hash change? So is this just going to a different place in the current page? If it is going to a place in the current page, we probably want to let that just fall through and let the browser move the user to where they need to be. Is this a download request? Is there some sort of value there where the user is trying to click a download link? Typically, you don't want to intercept those. And then lastly, is there anything in form data? So is this a post request? Again, for most single page applications, you're not going to want to intercept these. You're going to want to let them fall through. There may be edge cases where you do want to grab those and you can create kind of one-off handlers for those. But for the most part, this is going to be kind of your criteria for, should I even listen to this to begin with? All right, any questions? This one's a short demo. We're going to move on here, but before I do, any questions?
I know some of the framework routers use hash routing, so I don't know that always, right?
Yeah, so the comment was that some of the routing libraries still use hash routing. Most of them have moved away from that. Some of them do still support it. And so in that world, you'd have to do some work to kind of get this to map to hash routing. I would say the majority of single page applications these days use kind of the traditional, like they're mimicking the MPA where you just change the URL. But yes, if you're using this in a situation where you needed to do a hash-based routing, you'd have to massage it a little bit to get it all work correctly. Comments, questions? All right, next one. I'll bump this back down a bit. All right, so we're on to navigation demo number 3. We've got a speedboat. We're getting a little bit faster. We're doing this a little bit better. Now we're going to actually do something with our page links. So before, all we were doing was intercepting that event and then preventing it. But now we're actually going to make something happen. right? So the download links, they go to top and bottom. Those still work. Nothing's changed. The forms and the reload button aren't particularly relevant here, so they're still here, but I've hidden them. But let's look at page number 1. So it no longer says fake because I'm actually pointing to an HTML page. And I can prove that by middle clicking it. It's just some p tags with lorem ipsum text, right? This isn't full-on pages. We're just going to grab those fragments of HTML and we're going to pull them in. So if I hit page number 1, it's going to pull in that HTML that I was just showing you and just sticks it in the DOM using .inner HTML equals. We'll look at the code in a second, right? And so I can do this with all of them, right? Page 1, 2, and 3, I can click back and forth. It reaches out, grabs that DOM, sticks it in. And again, all of this is, as we'll look in the code right now, this is building on the example we just saw. So we're still using navigation.addEventListener. We're still checking should not intercept, but now we've added a whole bunch more code here in the middle that we will now look at. So the first thing we do, as I said, the event.destination.url, you can parse out with the URL constructor. We do that here, and we grab the path name. That's really the only bit that we care about for this demo. And so if the path name includes pages, which is where all these HTML pages are at, we go ahead and say, yes, browser, event.prevent default. We don't want to actually navigate to that page, even though it's an A tag. We want to prevent that. And we're going to introduce our own behavior. And what we're going to do is we're going to go fetch that code or fetch that HTML. We're going to grab that HTML as text from the fetch response, and then we're going to stick it into the DOM. So when you click those links, all it's doing is grabbing the path name from the destination URL and then doing that fetch, populating the DOM. So again, I know this isn't very impressive. It's going to get a little better as we go, but I want to slowly kind of build up how is all of this working together. And we'll see in the next one something that's a little more true to life. But before we move on to that one, questions, comments? All right, we'll keep moving on. So let me bump this back down. So navigation demo number 4. We're up to a yacht now, so we're really going to start exercising this thing. We're navigating. We are going to do a demo that's actually a little more true to life. So I've added a reset button now. We'll see why that's necessary here in a minute. The download link and go to buttons still work. No big deal there. Those work exactly as they have been. The page links are exactly the same as last time. So they go to the same pages. I can middle click them. Takes me to that HTML. So those are real links pointing to real HTML pages. But let's go ahead and click page number 1 and see what happens. All right, our content popped in. And unfortunately, Chrome doesn't expand its address bar, so it's really difficult to see. But in the address bar, it no longer says /demo04. It now says /pages/1. So we click the link. It actually changed the URL bar, but then it also still did the thing we were doing in the last demo. So something has changed here, right? We have informed the browser that we've done a navigation, that we've performed a navigation. So as I keep clicking through page 2 and page 3, the content's showing up just like it did last time, but the URL bar is changing from pages/1 to /2 to /3 back and forth. And I get my browser history just like I would any other time, right? Whoop, nope, not 3 fingers, 2 fingers. There we go, right? So I can go back to 3, then back to 2, then back to 1, forward to 2, forward to 3, right? So everything that works in browser navigation just works natively. The other thing that's really cool, that's really hard to do in single page applications, like there are whole libraries that handle this for you, is scroll restoration. So let's do this. So I'm on page 1. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. I'm going to go to page 2. I'm going to scroll down a little bit more. I'm going to go to page 3, but I'm going to go back. All right, so I'm in the place where I was scrolling, but I'm going to go back again. Oop, go back again. It bumped me up to where I was at scrolling-wise. I go back again. It bumped me up back to where I was at scrolling-wise. If you're building a single-page application, unless you have a library that does this for you, I can speak from experience, you probably don't handle this. Or you do what we do and you just say, on every navigation, just go to top. Because there is no like scroll restoration based on where you're navigating in your router by default. But this comes for free from the browser. So it knows where the user was. Just like if you're doing a multi-page application, right? You scroll halfway down the page, click a link, you read down halfway down that page, and you go back. You don't get tossed to the top of that previous page. You get tossed back into the middle, right where you were supposed to be. Unless it's a single page application, in which case, maybe you didn't. But in just like a traditional multi-page application, that's exactly what would happen, right? The browser knows where you scrolled to, so when you go through the history stack, it knows exactly where to put you to kind of keep that context. This navigation API does the exact same thing. When we tell the browser navigation happened, when it creates that navigation event, it also tracks where the scroll bar was, so that when you're going back and forth, it maintains that same scroll history or scroll position with your history, which I think is just phenomenal. Like, that's so hard to do in a single page application, and to have the browser just do that for you by default, fantastic. All right, so let's look at the code, right? What is different? What has changed in this demo that wasn't true before? So all of this up here is exactly the same, right? None of this has changed. What has changed is that instead of just, and actually this code right here is exactly the same, right? This is exactly the same from the last time, minus we're using async await instead of .thens on the promise. So the magic is right here. So I said much earlier in the slides, see if I can, yes, event.intercept, that's where all the magic happens. We're finally getting to that magic. By calling event.intercept, what you're telling the browser is, I'm going to do something that I want you to treat as if it were a regular navigation. And so in here, you hand it an async handler, always have to be async. And then we can do synchronous operations in here too. We don't have to use await, but it always has to be an async handler. And we can do whatever we need to do in here. And as soon as this promise resolves or rejects, the browser knows that that navigation event has been completed. And it actually provides listeners for navigate success and navigate error. So you know, did this thing actually succeed or did it fail? So if you've ever used, if you're in the React space and you've used either Remix or React Router, and they have this idea of loaders, where you can say, for this route, I want you to go and kind of do this async thing to get all my data ready. This is kind of the same idea. Not exactly, but it's kind of the same idea, right? I'm going to navigate, but as part of that navigation, I may opt to do some asynchronous things. And those asynchronous things are all a part of my navigation moving to a new page. Just like if you're in a multi-page application and you click to go to the next page, let's say the server takes 5 seconds to load that page, right? The browser's just gonna kind of sit there and load for 5 seconds. Then once the server finally gives you your HTML, it's there. This is mimicking that exact same behavior where we're saying we're going to do some sort of asynchronous operation akin to hitting a server for HTML. And then once it's done, navigation is complete. And then, as I said, the browser will track the life cycle of the promise of the async handler, right? When it calls it, it'll listen to, does this promise resolve successful navigation or does it reject a unsuccessful navigation? And it gives us some levers to pull based on whether that, either way, whether it was successful or not. All right, I'm going to pause here again. Thoughts, questions, comments? Yes?
It only, just confirming, it only goes into history if you resolve, and is that also when the URL will change at the end of the promise?
So the question is, does it go into the URL once the history resolves? No, it goes into, unless you call event.prevent default, it hits the history stack immediately. And then just like, again, just like a multi-page application, if you clicked a link and it takes you to the next page, if the next page 404 is, the navigation still happens, but you just get a 404 on the other side. So in this case, it's going to do the exact same thing. The navigation is going to happen, but you may get an error page after the navigation has completed.
I'm just curious, where do you look? Is the URL updated at the beginning of this?
It is, yep, and we'll see it in the next demo. Yep, so the URL, that's a great question. So the URL is updated immediately because we're not calling event.prevent default. Event.prevent default is the only way to stop the URL changing and to then prevent any subsequent action from occurring. So if we don't call that, the URL is always going to change. All right, we're gonna get to our 5th demo. We're gonna get a little crazy, do some fun stuff, keep building on what we've done so far. We bump this back down so we can see things a little better. All right, demo number 5. I have run out of boat emoji. There are only 4 in Unicode. So we're onto the compass, but it still works with our theme, so we're okay. Demo number 5. We're gonna have a little more fun here. Let's click page 1, just like we did before. Same thing. Nothing is different. Let's click page 2. Now, I don't know how easy that was to notice, but page 1 pops in immediately. Page 2 takes about 500 milliseconds. Now, I've artificially delayed that for us to kind of see what's happening, but what we're seeing there is kind of that mimicking that multi-page application where you're going to another page that takes a minute to load, right? So maybe I'm hitting a server with an async call, to get some data, and it takes 500 milliseconds. It works. Now, again, the browser address bar isn't getting larger here, but something happened when I hit page number 2 that's going to be really prevalent when I hit page number 3, because page number 3 has like a 5-second delay. Something's going to happen when I click page number 3. So first of all, you'll see we've got a loading indicator because we know this one's going to take a long time. So we can optionally show some sort of loading indicator, and then it finally pops in, right? We'll go back to number 2. When I hit this again, if you can, the little reload button is going to change from reload to the X, just like a multi-page application navigation. The other thing is the tab favicon is going to get the loading indicator, just like a multi-page application. So again, it's super tiny, but up there you get the little spinning blue bar, just like you would with a normal navigation. So now, not only are we navigating, but we're letting the user know, just like any other navigation, that something is happening, that they are waiting on a page to load. And that's tied into the browser navigation lifecycle, where I don't even know if that's possible to do with our current primitives that we have for navigation, right? I don't think you can actually change to get the loading spinner on the tab favicon. So now, again, our navigation event is being treated just like any other. So we get the spinner, we get the cancellation button, which is awesome. We can also do things like redirects, where I click 4 and it just kicks me over to 1. And the way we're doing this is, we'll see in the source code in just a second, this is where we're doing a navigation replace instead of a push. Because if I did a push, then when I went back 1, it would try to take me to 4, which would redirect me to 1. So I would get the user into a case where every time they try to go back, it would just kick them forward to 1. So we use a replace to say, if they try to hit 4, just throw 1 on top, because they shouldn't ever get back to 4. So it keeps their history clean. Now, these are all A tags, right? But this also works when you're doing it programmatically. So go to page 1, 2, and 3. This is using the navigation.navigate function. And again, to see just how simple this is, view the page source. This is not the right page. See, this is why I added the reset. Again, because it's navigated us in the URL, if I hit reload, it's going to take us to that page, which is just the HTML fragment. I don't have my server set up to handle actual SPA navigation. Your servers are probably already set up that way. So that's just an idiosyncrasy of the demo. So I'm going to reset back to the demo page. Now we're going to view the source. I can bump this up a little bit. Like these right here, navigation.navigate, and I just give it the path. I'm like, that's it. There's no having to mess with weird APIs or pass some weird state. It's just, here's the URL, go there. And if you're using a routing library, you probably have an API similar to this with like a navigate or navigate to or transition to or whatever function call that you can programmatically call to accomplish the same thing. The nice thing is, built into the browser, you don't need a library. Let's look back at the demo. I use the word sneak here. These are going to be replaces, right? Where we are at one place on the history, right? And we're just going to replace it with another. So let's say I click page 1, then page 2, then back to page 1, right? So in my history, it's 1, 2, 1. If I sneak to page 3, first of all, it's going to do the normal navigation. So I don't have to tell this button, when I go to page 3, I need you to do this 5 seconds of loading. Because all of that is centralized, anytime I go to page 3, it'll automatically do that for me. So I told it to sneak to page 3, which is just a way of saying history. You're wanting to replace the history element. So before, it was 1, 2, 1 in my history stack. Now it's 3, 2, 1. So if I go back, it'll take me to page 2. If I go back again, it'll take me to page 1. If I go forward to 2, and then forward to 3, right? So we replace that top one on the stack. The other nice thing is I said before we have that navigate success and navigate error event that you can listen to. So we can also add things like progress indicators. Maybe we don't want to just use the navigation indicators in the browser, although it's nice that we have those now. Maybe you want to also add something like one of those bars that goes across the top, so we can go to page 1, boom, happens quickly. Page 2, a little bit slower. Page 3, it takes the full like 4 or 5 seconds. And so it'll show that loading spinner. That progress indicator is being driven off of that navigation success and navigation error. So when a navigate happens, we start. And then when a navigation error or success gets fired, we just go ahead and tell it to be done. And we'll, that one, you'll have to look in the source code on GitHub. I don't show that in the source code here. So let's look at how we do this in the JavaScript source. And what we're going to find is we haven't actually done that much more. We've done very little to enable all of these cool spinners and things like that. The first thing we did is right here. I don't think I can make this too much bigger without, making it small or having it scroll over. This is where we do our redirect, where we say if pages/4 comes across, we're going to go ahead and call navigation.navigate right here. And by calling that, it's going to kind of cancel our current one and do something new. Now, if we didn't hit history with the replace value, it would push it onto the stack. But because we said history replace, we're saying replace it on the stack. So this is where you can do your redirects fairly trivially. And then everything in here is basically the same, except for these lines, which I will bump up. First thing we do is we say, if we're going to page 2, this is where I just add that artificial delay. And then if we're going to page 3, we go ahead and insert our loading indicator, and then we delay for 5 seconds. Now again, if you're using a framework, most frameworks these days are fairly declarative, so it's probably not going to look exactly like this once this browser API makes its way into routing libraries. But maybe you're in a situation where you're just going to be using this directly, or you're in a situation where you're using vanilla JavaScript, TypeScript sort of a deal, and you're not using a view library. Knowing that you can do it in this way is still helpful as well. And honestly, like that's it. The checking for page 4 and calling a navigation with the replace value, adding the delay to page 2, and then adding the delay to page 3 with the loading indicator. That's the only difference between this demo and the other one. But by adding those, we have an even more true-to-life scenario where we're doing some asynchronous work to get data, where we have some redirects through our application that send us from one page to another. And again, the nice thing is we don't have to change our A tags. We don't have to change our buttons. We don't have to change almost anything. We can centralize all of our logic right here. And again, routing libraries eventually will take care of a lot of this for us, but we have this power in all Chromium-based browsers today, and it will be trickling down to the other browser families as well. Any questions on this one? Everyone's really hungry, and they're like, let's get to lunch. That's fair. That's fair. All right, I've got just a few more slides here while we wrap up. We got through the demos. So there's way more to explore. I could only cover so much in this amount of time. So we have the idea of transitions. So when an event is happening, the browser manages that a little differently. And so you can do things like listen to the transition, see when it occurred, has it fulfilled yet, has it not. You can cancel navigation. So you can imagine if you're doing asynchronous work and you're making a call to a server, but the user clicks a second link, you want to kind of shut down that first call and then continue with that second one. You don't want race conditions of gathering data and then sticking it in different places in the DOM. And so there is an ability to cancel navigations. Again, a little beyond what we could take a look at today, but also very interesting. The navigation entry, just like if you're using history.pushState or .replaceState, it does have this idea of having a state value on it where you can hand it any structurally clonable, basically JSON serializable data payload, and it'll carry that in the history stack. So it'll keep that with it. So if you're needing to do maybe filtering, but you can't stick that data in the URL for whatever reason, you can stick that with the navigation event, and it'll be persisted in the history. And so as they move back and forth across those pages, you can pull those out and use them to filter whatever data is on the screen. There's also a very ephemeral bit of data called info that also I think has to be structurally clonable, meaning JSON serializable mostly. And that is ephemeral to the event. So it doesn't get stuck on the history stack. It just flows with the event. So things, kind of the canonical example you'll see in the documentation is maybe I want to do a specific transition. I want to like fade to the right or to the left based on this certain event. You could pass that in info, right? You don't need to keep that in the history stack. It's just for this one event, I want to do this one additional thing. And then the navigation API actually has a well-crafted way for us to do navigation blocking, which is a big pain to do right now. And again, I don't recommend doing this unless absolutely necessary. It can be a big UX issue, but there are situations where you absolutely have to let the user know if you navigate away from this page, there's going to be issues. The navigation API provides a better way to do that in a single location. You can check out all of this out on MDN. There are lots of other resources. Speaking of resources. So on these slides, if you pull them at the beginning, and I'll tweet them out after this talk as well, you can click on all these links. The demos I showed today are up on Netlify. You can go through them live. The demo source code is up on GitHub, and there were a few more things that I couldn't show in the source code if you want to see, like, how did this work? How did that work? The MDN navigation API docs, which I've referenced already. If you are really hardcore and you want to look at the actual spec of what's being ratified, you can do that as well. And then there's a great blog post from the Chrome for Developers blog on this whole thing. Why did it get created? And it's from a little earlier in its life cycle, so they do a good job introducing the concepts. All right, that's all I got. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed walking through the navigation API. I think it unlocks some really cool things for the future. Have a great rest of the conference and enjoy lunch.